Hello and welcome to Female Voices Life and Loss. Today I have the honor to welcome Jenny Brandemuehl. I hope I pronounced that correct. The author of Forever Fly Free, one woman's story of resilience and the power of hope and love. And we're going to hear all about that. Jenny, this is her memoir. She begins on the day her husband, Mark, survived a fiery plane crash with burns covering 80% of his body. Mark endured months of surgeries, setbacks, and small triumphs, with Jenny faithfully by his side. His courageous fight eventually came to an end, leaving Jenny to face not only profound grief, but also the difficult work of rebuilding her life. And so I'm sure this is going to be a very inspirational episode to listen to as Jenny shares her story and how she came from enduring something so difficult to writing a book. So, Jenny, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Teresa. I really appreciate being on the show.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you reaching out to be on the show. People may not realize that, but people reach out to be on the show, and you are one of those. And I'm so grateful that you did, because we chatted a little bit prior to this, and just such an inspirational story that I'm super excited to you to share it with the listeners. So before we get right into that, can you share just a little bit about you, maybe like where you live and some other information about you, so the
Yeah,
listeners get to
sure.
know who you are?
Yeah. So I live in Northern California, south of San Francisco. Been here many years. My husband, Mark, and I raised our kids here. We have two sons who are in their 20s and early 30s now. And we were a really active family, loved skiing, hiking, traveling, live music, food, hosting dinner parties. Mark loved to cook, so did I. And we both had careers in technology. And I also worked in fashion for a while, mostly in leadership roles. And, I would say that our lives were on a happy autopilot before the terrible day of what happened to Mark. We were about to retire to Lake Tahoe. We had both given notice in our jobs. And so this was June of 2019. And we were planning to retire in January of 2020 and to move to Lake Tahoe to ski, hike, and be outdoors and spend more time with friends and family. And Mark was a recreational pilot, so we hoped to go on short flights to see family and enjoy live music and, just see the country.
It sounds beautiful, beautiful. And obviously, from what I shared already, that did not happen. And so, share with us a little bit, if you can kind of go back and share. Take your time with this. Share the day of the crash and anything you'd like to share prior to that or leading
Yeah.
up to that.
Yeah. So this was going back to June of 2019. Mark had flown he was living in Lake Tahoe, trying it out to see if it would be the place we'd want to retire to. And he had a job with a startup in Reno. And so he kept his small engine plane in Carson City. And he was an experienced pilot. He'd been piloting for 20 years. He grew up on a dairy farm in Wisconsin. So I totally trusted his abilities because he had been operating farm equipment since he was 11, and he was an engineer by background. And so in June, he decided to go get one of those one-day executive health checkups before his retirement. His father had died of a heart attack in his 70s, and Mark wanted to make sure his cardiac health was good. So he flew out to Scottsdale to go to the Mayo Clinic. And after a full day checkup, he called me and said, two thumbs up. I'm doing great. My health is great. And so it was all good news. And then the next day after lunch, he got in his plane to fly out of Scottsdale back to Carson City. And what happened was about 7 minutes after takeoff, he reported a rough running engine and declared emergency with the airport tower. At that point, he was in a northwestern suburb of Phoenix called Deer Valley, and they directed him to the local airport, but he knew he was going to make it. And what bystanders and witnesses told me happened was he would have had a near perfect landing for an emergency landing on a 2-lane road if there hadn't been drivers on the road. So what happened was there were 3 drivers, and when he approached the road, the first driver told me later that she literally locked eyes with Mark as he was headed towards her in the plane, and she thought she was going to die in that moment. And suddenly Mark swerved right to avoid hitting them, but because he had no engine power or very little, the plane was careening and the right wing clipped 2 light poles, caught on fire because the fuel tanks are in the wings. The plane hit a concrete barrier, flipped upside down, and he crash landed face down on the side of the road in flames. And what happened, amazingly, was there was a good Samaritan named Thomas Honeycutt who happened to be driving by right in that moment with his partner. And he said he got out of his car and he was really angry because he said everybody was filming. All they were doing was filming. Someone had called 911, but he was angry. And he said to me, I thought to myself, if no one goes out to rescue the pilot, he's going to die. And so here Thomas is in shorts and flip-flops. It's a June day in Phoenix. He goes running out to the plane. And then he's told me later, and while I was running out there, Jenny, I was thinking to myself, if the pilot still has his seatbelt on, I'm not going to be able to rescue him. And he said he goes running out there thinking this. And right when he got to the cockpit window, which was completely cracked open, he saw Mark, and then he saw the seatbelt literally melt off of Mark's body in that moment. Now, what was really interesting was there was another woman who was a bystander who was the first witness at the site. And she told me later, I was so distressed, I didn't know what to do, Jenny. And I saw your husband in there, and all I could think of was, I just have to pray for him. So she prayed for him. And what we pieced together in the timing was when she prayed and when Thomas showed up, and then the seatbelt melted off, all happened around that time in that sequence. So it was really, in my mind, a miracle that Mark was rescued. So Thomas, who's 5'9", very buff jiu-jitsu champion, pulled Mark out of the cockpit on one try, and Mark is 6'2", 220 pounds. So you had to believe it was pure adrenaline for Thomas to have pulled him out on one try. And then 2 guys came running over from a motorcycle mechanic school nearby, and the 3 of them carried Mark to safety across the road, and then the plane exploded.
Oh my goodness.
So there was no question to me what Thomas did was love in action. He saved Mark's life. And he would later go on to win a Carnegie Hero Award, which they only give nationally to 4 people a quarter who have risked their life to save someone else's life. And I just want to say, Thomas's family, they are absolutely a part of our family now because of his heroic acts that day. Well, so the good news was the Arizona Burn Center, which is a renowned burn center in the country, was only a few minutes away. They managed to get him there. And here's what's crazy. This is such a testament to who Mark was. He was a huge lover of life. I mean, when I look back, we had no regrets about our life. We lived life fully. But he had the presence of mind to call me from ER because the terrible thing was over 80% of his body was 3rd-degree burned from that accident, right? And he called me and he said, and I was at work that day, and he said, I love you, Jenny. I want you to know something happened to the plane, and I'm in for a very long, long recovery. And then he passed me to the doctor, and the doctor was just talking. I didn't understand a word he said. And I kept asking, what happened to Mark's plane? And he says, I really don't know because I was just on the receiving end in ER. So I have no idea. And so I asked him, all I need to know is are his injuries life-threatening? And if they are, I got to come right away. He says, yes, they are life-threatening. And so I hung up. I rushed home. Our oldest son, Wesley, was at home living with us at the time. He helped me get on the next flight to Phoenix. The press was calling me, and I still didn't even know what happened to the plane. And so I got to Phoenix, and by then they had put Mark in a medically induced coma. Because what I have learned is that burn is the most traumatic injury a human body can endure. And so the condition is painful, the treatment is painful, and they always put you in medically induced coma when it's that severe. And so when I arrived, Mark was a mummy. He was completely wrapped up in white bandages. His eyes were showing, but he was in a coma, so he was unconscious. And he was pretty much unconscious in a coma for 4.5 months. And so there really was no way to talk to him. But during that time, he survived sepsis, he survived a blood clot, he survived constantly fluctuating vitals because your skin is your largest protective covering. And when you lose
Right.
it, right, your system kind of dysregulates a lot, can't regulate. And he also survived a near fatal fungal infection. So, yeah, it was a lot. 4.5 months. Then he came out of it after 4.5 months. And it was really funny because, again, a testimony to how much of a fighter he was and how much he loved life. The 3 sentences that he said to me when he first woke up, the first was, I want to mix and mingle, which means I want to go to a party. And the second sentence was, I want to go on an adventure. And the third was, I want a martini. And our doctor said, you tell Mark when he comes off his tracheotomy and his respiratory machine, we will mix him up a martini. What kind of gin does he like? And I said, Bombay Sapphire up with a twist. And he said, oh, he's a gentleman. Yes, we'll arrange that. But that was kind of who Mark was. He was a great lover of life. And the other thing I didn't mention is they had to amputate both his legs above knee. They were so badly burned, they had to do partial amputations on his fingers. So I knew and anticipated he was going to come home handicapped, but we had such hope that he's such a resourceful person. He would learn to adaptive ski. He might even invent something that would be an innovation. We knew it would be hard, but all our friends and family thought that he would pull through. And then what happened after 5 months was he came down with a routine hospital infection that was resistant to antibiotics, and he died within 24 hours. So it was a roller coaster with lots of ups and downs. And, one of the things I just wanted to share about the story, because I know for most people who hear this, it just sounds just like tragedy after tragedy and awfulness. I look back and I believe that hope and the belief in miracles kept me going. And let me give an example. When Mark was
Yeah.
diagnosed with a near fungal infection, a near fatal fungal infection, the doctor said, call the whole family in because he may not make it through the weekend. And when they came out, the doctors all said, okay, there are 3 potential scenarios for Mark. The fungal infection started in his arms. A, either he takes a turn for the better. B, it spreads to the rest of his arms and we have to amputate his arms. And I thought, oh my God, no. Then he can't do anything. And then the third scenario is it spreads to his internal organs and he dies right away. And it was interesting, Teresa, because the day after the meeting with the doctors, in the morning, I'm in the waiting room and I heard a still small voice say to me, Mark will be fine. Don't worry. Don't doubt. And I thought, wow, I am losing it. I'm clearly so stressed out that I'm starting to hear things. And then it was very interesting. The second day after I went and worked out, because that's how I kept myself going in the morning, work out, eat a good breakfast, right? Because I'm going to spend the whole day at the
Nice.
hospital. As I'm walking back to my condo from the fitness center, I heard those words again. I heard, Mark will be fine. Don't worry, don't doubt. And then I paid attention and I thought, well, where did that come from? Is it my intuition? Is it some inner voice? Is it God? And I look back now, it really doesn't matter. It didn't matter where
No.
it came from. It was the fact that I heard it. And then the third day in a row, I heard it again. And do you know the fungal infection never spread? And 6 weeks later, he got through it. He pulled through. And it was the first time I started to trust my intuition and to listen for that small voice that could tell me things that you kind of normally say, how would you know that? But I just knew. And that was the first time I started to trust my intuition. And I wanted to also say on the topic of hope, real quick,
Yeah.
is that because of the way the doctors modeled everything through those 5 months, they never said never and they never said always. And if you remember the fungal infection, they said there are 3 scenarios. And that was really helpful to our family because what I realized afterwards, and I say this all the time now, my definition of hope is now not having an expectation, but having a belief in possibilities.
Yeah. It's beautiful.
So every step of the way, we felt like there were always possibilities. And the doctor was trying to tell me he was going to die the first 2 weeks. He didn't. He was miraculously rescued. And so I think there was always this belief that, the extraordinary could happen. Not that it was guaranteed, but it was always a possibility until the day he died.
I love that you shared that for sure. Just the hope that so many need to hear that there is hope, and it's just an understanding that there is something else or could be something else. I love that the doctors gave you 3 different scenarios that could happen. So that definitely tells me that kind of breathed into you hope, I think, for sure, that there is this possibility, um, for sure. Tell me, you said that you went and you worked out, you ate well, and then you spent the day at the hospital. So is that typically every day? And the second part of that is you just said how old your boys are now. How old were they then, and how did you manage that? Because I'm like,
Yeah.
what about the kids? Where were the kids and all that?
Yeah.
That's hard.
Yeah.
I'm sure that was very difficult, just navigating all of that and supporting them too. So speak to that
Yeah.
if you would.
Yeah, I'll start with just talking about the boys. My youngest one was 23 when this happened. He was
Okay.
in the middle of a master's program in Switzerland, in Zurich. He had just finished his first semester. My oldest son was living at home. He was 26 and
Okay.
looking for a job at the time. He was in between jobs. And my younger one basically dropped out of his master's program temporarily
Mm,
to come spend his semester and summer at the burn center with me. So he was my faithful companion of going to the hospital every day. And because Wesley was looking for a job, I told him just stay home, because that is the other important thing, is that I was away from home, from all that was familiar and from my own support community. We had family friends in Phoenix, but that wasn't where I was from. Right. And so that was tough. And how I got through that time and what my routine was: burn survivors need to stay really clean, don't catch infections. And so
sure.
every morning they spent 2 to 3 hours rebandaging and cleaning up Mark's body. And so I really couldn't get in until noontime every day. And so it left me some time in the morning to just catch up on life, pay bills, eat a good breakfast. I decided that I was running a marathon and I had to. It's a classic story of, or what they say when you're on the plane: put your oxygen mask on before you help somebody, your kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think I kicked into kind of a leader role where I said to myself, my husband is unconscious. I can't let him down. I have to be strong for him because there are medical decisions to be made, right? The first one was the doctor asking, how far do you want us to go to save your husband because he's going to come home handicapped? And so these are important questions, and I knew I had to be on and I couldn't fall apart. And so my routine in the morning was to eat a decent breakfast, workout, as I said. Sleep was hard. I don't think anybody going through this kind of stress sleeps well, even if they try. And so I subscribed to a guided meditation app that kind of helped me go back to sleep when I woke up in the middle of the night, and I took a lot of naps. And then my routine is I pack a lunch for Adrian and I, my younger son, and we go to the hospital and wait in the waiting room until they called us. We pretty much spent all that time in ICU with him the rest of the day. We take an early break for dinner around 5 and then come back for a couple hours and then go home. And I just believe that our positive energy in the room could only help him,
Oh, sure.
even if we weren't the ones doing what the nurses were doing, right? Which was taking care of him every minute of the day.
So were you in like a hotel room this whole time, or staying with friends?
Yeah. Yeah, a
I'm
dear
like,
friend.
I'm like, my whole mind is like, how? Oh my goodness. Oh
Yeah,
my
I
goodness.
pretty much well, first thing was I took a leave from work.
Yeah, and I thought about that too. Like, what about work?
Yeah, I had to take a leave because it was becoming obvious it was gonna be a while, and my dear friend Susie said, "Let me help you rent an Airbnb." So she helped me find one. that was 20 minutes to the hospital and had an extra room so the boys could always visit or stay. So that worked out great. And one thing I did, Teresa, was because everybody was so far away, friends and family,
Yeah.
I started posting medical updates every day on one of those online caregiver communities, right? It was a private community you had to register
Sure. Yeah, yeah,
on.
yeah.
And what I found myself doing was I started to pour out my heart about what was going on for Mark and I and the family on this on this community. And just so you know, I was a very private person before the accident. I was happy to share good news, but I did not share much if it was bad news in my life. And it was the first time I started to just share everything I was going through, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it was unbelievable because the outpouring of support and love that came back to me really surprised me in more ways than I could imagine. And at one point, Adrian said to me, Mom, you do know there are over 500 people who are on this community now. And then I found out after Mark died that people in the community were forwarding my posts onto their communities of faith. So synagogues, churches, I mean, we have thousands of people following my posts and praying for Mark and our family. And one of the things I realized it created a virtuous circle of love. Because Mark went to Stanford Business School and his 300 plus classmates, usually on their own private community, the kinds of things they're going to post are, hey, anybody know a really great interim CFO for a startup in St. Louis? And then they told me when what happened to Mark got to all the news got to them. They were inspired by his courage. They were inspired by Thomas Honeycutt's courage. They start talking about courage. They start talking about their own health scares. They start talking about life in a deeper way. And I was just really touched that what happened to us opened up a whole level of dialogue and engagement with each other that was at such a deeper level and more meaningful level. And so, yeah, it was a really amazing thing to witness. And I think of James Doty's quote that when you start to look at, he said, when I look at myself differently, the world starts to look at me differently. And by the way, I'm so sorry, it's the late James Doty. He just died July 17th. But that's what happened. I think that when I could see love in action like that, it brought love into my life. When I could be vulnerable,
Sure. Sure.
it allowed other people to be vulnerable and to help me because Mark and I didn't know how to ask for help before this. We were both firstborn kids in our family, so it was always about helping other people. And I was a real type A person before the accident, and so I was a doer. And it was a huge learning experience for me to go through receiving love and support
Yeah.
and seeing how it affected others too, the ripple
Yeah.
effect.
Well, and I just want to, I mean, it touches my heart, and I can see just the beauty in all of those people around you and how they supported you. Really, I mean, they weren't physically there, but the support sounds like it was tremendous. And the love that all around you, even if it wasn't right there with you, it was definitely there. I just totally, what I'm thinking is that really helped with supporting you to make sure you took care of you. I love what I will say in air quotes, self care that you did tremendously for yourself. Because many times, and the statistics is super, super high, and I don't know the number right now off the top of my head, but those that are caring for other people, many, many times they decline. Their health declines because they're doing so much care for that other person. And with you, what I'm hearing you say, and you can correct me, there may have been some decline, but with you, it sounds like you really took care of yourself. Hospital staff, part of that, was it just all the people around you that helped support you, or was that always in your past that you just carried forward? Or was it the boys that you're like, I got to take care of me? You talked about putting your oxygen mask on first, but when such tragedy like that happens, we don't always think clearly for sure. So that's kind of what I'm thinking, like, where did that all come from? Or was it just your intuition, like you talked about? Where does all that come from? The self-care,
Well,
all of that. It's
yeah, I
amazing.
mean, the community, my online community, people said,
Yeah.
"Jenny, you are so strong. I hope you are taking care of yourself. Like, what are you doing for yourself?"
Mhm. Mhm.
The nurses and the staff, the respiratory technicians, they were amazing. So in ICU, Burn ICU, they are there long term with you, right? Because you're going to be there for months and months. It's not like ER or they see you for 3 days and you're checked out. And so the nurses worked 3-day, 12-hour shifts on a rotating basis. And so I would see the same nurses over and over again. They became my second family. They were an amazing group of people, and I got to know them. I cared about their hopes and dreams. They cared about our hopes and dreams. I really got a number of them were parents of children, and we talked a lot about parenting and life and balancing, work-life balance when you're a working parent. And I came to respect and admire the nurses and the staff at the Burn Center because it is just one of the toughest nursing jobs you could imagine. Music meant a lot to Mark and I, and so I had a rotation of playlists going
Mm.
in his room. I believed that it could be healing. We had a meditation playlist. We had his favorite rock song playlist, and the nurses got to know us through the music, and if you think about it, they said, the only way we know anything about the patients is through the family because all the patients here are in an induced coma. And when you're spending 8 hours a day in an ICU room, you get to know the nurses really well.
Yeah.
And, one of the stories when I go back to the ripple effect of, I think, hope and love, I have this great story. So I was a little late coming to see Mark one day. I had a doctor's appointment in Phoenix. And while I was at the doctor's, a phone call comes in from the burn center. And the nurse that was taking care of Mark called and said, Mark was anxious this morning before his dressing change, and he was calling for you. And I have him on speakerphone if you're willing to talk to him. And I thought, wow, she went above and beyond. I got on the phone. I talked to Mark. He couldn't speak. I just said, I love you, honey. I'll be there soon. How are you doing? We chit chatted for a few seconds and then they hung up. Afterwards, I said to the nurse, that was so kind of you to do that. Most nurses would just say, don't worry, Mark, your wife will be here in a few hours. You'll get through it. And she went above and beyond. And she said to me, Jenny, witnessing how much you and Mark love each other. And by the way, we were soulmates. I'm going to start crying now, but he was the love of my life. We were together for 30 years. She said, the love I saw between the two of you really inspired me, and it's caused me to raise the bar on who I would want to date in my life now. And she was in her 20s, younger. And I was so touched by that. And
Yeah.
after Mark died, she told me that she started dating the male nurse that took care of Mark the day he died. He was one of the kindest nurses there, and that they got engaged during COVID. And she said, when we're ready to get married, you've got to come to the wedding with the boys, because I thought to myself, wow, I spent a lot of time in nature when I was grieving. It was COVID, so there wasn't much of an outlet to go do anything socially. And I just observed like seasons changing, the ebb and flow of nature. And I thought, wow, I think what happened here was the like death led to birth of a new love between two other people. And that's what I mean by, I believe now that love is an energy more than an emotion, ripples out and affects other people around you. So the
And there was
nurses played a huge role.
Yeah, and that ripple definitely came back to you. I can hear that, and that touches me too, the young woman. That's just beautiful. And you mentioned, and I think this was in something that you sent to me or we talked about the micro moments of joy. What are some of those small kind of practices or moments that help you really endure those hardest days there and during and after?
Yeah.
How do
I started to try meditating every day.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so it was trying to find that place of inner stillness. I also journal while I was at the Burn Center, and I continued to after Mark died. And I think what that did was it helped me pay attention to the small moments that I could enjoy, right? It could be so simple, right? I have rose bushes in my garden. Just seeing the beauty of the roses in my backyard while I'm having coffee in the morning would be just amazing. A hug with my son who was staying with us, just small, simple things. And by the second, I'd say a year into my grief journey, I thought to myself, how do I find joy again? And then I became more intentional about it. I said, what are things that really give me joy? Because there's nothing stopping me from doing that now, even though I feel really sad, right? And
Sure.
so I said, I want to learn Italian. It was on my bucket list to learn Italian. I start learning Italian. I learned to play pickleball. I just sort of started to do things for myself that I knew would bring joy and fun back into my life.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Jenny, what would you share with the listeners really um, that maybe they're having difficulty finding that joy and really embracing it while still really honoring the pain that they're going through? Because there is nothing easy about embracing and noticing. For you, you noticed it. You noticed those things and you did things to promote and foster, I'll say, and navigate moving towards joy. But what would you say to them that maybe they're not you for sure? What would you say to them to help them to really embrace that joy while they're going through so much pain of their loss that they're experiencing possibly?
Yeah. I think that it's really important to allow yourself to go through the full cycle of your feelings without judging
Mhm.
yourself.
Yeah.
I happen to be lucky because my grief started right at the start of COVID. Mark died in October 2019, and by February, COVID shut things down, and I couldn't run away from it. And so that would have been my first response, to run away and distract myself. And I think to not feel the pressure to put a mask on around friends in the world, because I think American culture is positive. We like everything to be positive. And I
Mhm.
know it's awkward with friends and family. They want to fix things and they know they can't fix grief when you lose someone important in your life. And so I think it's just important to give yourself the space and to make it feel okay to feel sad. And if you're not feeling the moments of joy, that's okay for now. I think everybody's on their own timeline. And I guess one reframe I think of is, I had heard early on that grief is love looking for a home. I just love that, because it made me realize that I just had all this love for Mark that had nowhere to go, and that all I had were memories. And when you believe that you are capable of love, and it doesn't have to be romantic love, but just love for others, love for beautiful landscape or your dog or your cat, that starts to provide the bridge, right, into potential moments of joy. And I just found that really helped me. And I joined a grief support group for people who lost a partner and spouse. I didn't want to see a therapist because I felt like I had a lot of friends who would listen to me and family, and they didn't all understand what it was like to lose my beloved. And I wanted to be around people who understood what I was going through. And so we were sad together, but I would say we helped each other. We felt like we understood each other. And one of the things we did is, a lot of people in the group would share a funny story or a great story about their partner. And we would all laugh together and feel that warm glow of how much they enjoyed their husband, wife, or partner. And so I think it helps to be in community, to find a community,
For sure.
because we were not meant to be alone as human
That's
beings,
so
right?
true.
And
So
I
true.
think of, I don't know if listeners have seen that documentary by Robert Putnam called Bowling Alone on Netflix, but he's also had a book of research. But he says Americans have become increasingly isolated as a society and we've lost our sense of community. And so I think it's really important to have that human connection with others. And I
Yeah.
think that can help also in coming out of and finding some moments of joy and pleasure again, to laugh with somebody, right?
That's Jenny, that's beautiful. Yeah, doing what I do as a grief coach, that is one of the things that I encourage. Some of the things that you just talked about is what you did, journaling, super important, so important to journal. The other thing is finding those connections, finding those people, sharing stories to honor your loved one. I love that the group made sure that they did that to share their stories so you could laugh together and share those moments by honoring the ones that you had lost. Those are all beautiful. As I do one on one coaching, but I also do group. And I think many, many times it's important for people to know that you are the only one that knows what is best for you. And I'm glad that you shared that you did find what was best for you to heal your grief. And you could very much, because we were isolated and shut down as a country, that you found ways, because I could just envision other people that lost loved ones at that time, and I've talked to them that they were so isolated that it really still is to this day, sometimes still affecting them because that isolation was forced on them when they really needed to be in community, like you talked about. And so I'm really, it just touches my heart that you were able to do all of that and knew to do that. You know, talk about your intuition. You knew what you needed, and I think it's so important to pay attention to those voices, those things that are being said that we hear around us, so that we can heal.
Yeah. I think the other thing that helped, Teresa, just hearing you describe all that, your own experiences coaching people in
Hmm.
grief, is I had a dear friend say to me after the first year, which was I was in total shock. I mean, there's no way
Yes.
around how hard it is the first year. You're just in shock. And she said to me after the first year, it's time for you to create new memories, Jenny. And to your point, Teresa, it's to honor the past. And they're not, new memories are not going to replace the old ones. You're always going to have those wonderful memories of Mark and your time together as a family. And it's time to create new memories. And so let me give you a really tangible example. We were supposed to buy a house in Lake Tahoe. I put an end to that because I didn't know where things were going, but I thought, well, I still love the outdoors. I still love to ski. I think I want to still buy a place, but just like a town home where I don't have to deal with the snow maintenance because Mark loved that. He was from Wisconsin. And so I still decided to spend time up there. Well, everything reminded me of him. And I remembered being up there and just crying, crying, crying. Everything reminded me of, oh, we used to go to that restaurant. Oh, we used to go to that beach. Oh, we used to ski there. Now I'm skiing by myself. And did I make a mistake in coming here? And it was very interesting. My friend who said, it's time to create new memories. I had friends who would come visit. We start to create new memories. So, for example, I would have a memory of going to the supermarket there. It's a small town to go buy Mark some IPA beers. He was a huge IPA drinker. But now what was happening, I was going there to buy fish because one of my friends was a gourmet cook and she was making paella on the barbecue. Or we go to the beach and it's now with 4 friends, right? And we're going to go kayaking. Mark would never go kayaking. Speed was his middle name. Kayaking was too slow. He wanted a speedboat, right? And so I think in grief, I feel like there were 4 stages that in this, it's not linear. You kind of
No.
circle, you take 1 step forward, 2 steps back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I felt like there were 4 stages when I look back because it's been 6 years now. First year was shock. And then I went through, who am I? A friend of mine, Dr. Connie Mariano, who lost her husband the same summer, said, you're going from we to me. and who is me now after many years of being together. And then the third is really, it forced me to grow as a person. And case in point, when I was in COVID with my grief support group, I realized everybody in my group lost their partner to an illness. And when Kobe Bryant had that helicopter accident and he and his daughter died, I got very triggered and I thought, I need to talk to somebody who's gone through a traumatic injury death. And I contacted an organization named Access that's for families who lost a loved one to an aviation disaster. And Heidi Snow, who runs that organization, was so kind, hooked me up with a woman in Maine who had lost her husband to a plane accident 5 years earlier.
Wow.
She was remarried. Her children were three children under 12 when her husband died. And she was so helpful. She said to me, Jenny, one day you're going to look back and you're going to realize how much you grew as a person. And she says, look, I would never not want my husband back. But I realize now that I really had a chance to grow. And I'm telling you now, even though you don't appreciate it, without your partner, you now don't have anyone you have to negotiate your life with. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
And you won't get that time again if you remarry or find somebody else right away. So get to know yourself, right? Get to know yourself. And she remarried after, I think, 3 or 4 years. And I thought for the first time, could I find another soulmate in my life? Because as I got to know myself, I was very independent. Mark and I both were, but we realized we were better together in a delightful way.
Mm.
And 80% of me was still intact after he passed. But I said, I'm wired for partnership. At some point, I think he would be really happy for me to find another partner again. He would not want me sitting around crying all the time. Right. And so the growth and learning to trust my intuition. And then I went through some physical healing. I think when you go through trauma, there's a level of PTSD in your body that you got to recover from. And so I did go through some healing there as well, very recently, actually.
Glad. I'm glad that you did that. I love that you said, like, who am I now? Because that and going from we to you, like me, those are things that when I'm working with somebody, those are addressed quite frequently. And who are you and who do you want to be now? Because you are forever changed when you experience the loss of a loved one. So I want to make sure we could talk. I could feel that we could talk for a long time, but I want to talk about your book. What inspired the book? I want you to share the name again of the book. And it just released not too long ago. When this is being released, right in December through the holidays, which are really difficult times for those that are grieving. So share a little bit about what inspired the book, and just some insight on the book itself.
Yeah. So as I had mentioned, I'd been pouring my heart out in those posts every day for 5 months. And at Mark's memorial service, I had a lot of people come up to me and say, Jenny, you have to write a book. Your posts were very inspiring, and it would really help others who are going through all sorts of life challenges to be inspired and learn from you. And so I wrote the book because I wanted to pay it forward in terms of all the acts of kindness I received to be able to help others. I knew I would know when I was ready to write the book, and I just didn't worry about it. And about 2 years into my grief journey, I felt ready. I felt like I had enough to say, and I felt like I could write the story without getting really, really choked up constantly. And so that was what happened. It flowed right out of me. I mean, I wrote the whole thing in a year
Wow.
and found an agent and a publisher fairly quickly because I think they thought the
Wow.
message could be so helpful and powerful. And, it's my life. I mean, I don't think of it that way, right? But
Yeah. Yeah.
that's kind of the reaction I got. So the book is called Forever Fly Free, One Woman's Story of Resilience and the Power of Hope and Love. And the reason why it's called Forever Fly Free, it's kind of a metaphor on multiple levels. I had said to a friend after Mark died, I feel like a baby bird that got pushed out of its nest in free fall.
Mm.
And I learned to fly. And that's what the book's about. It's about the time that Mark and I spent at the Burn Center together and all the experiences that I described and more, and kind of what kept me going during that time. And then the latter part of the book is about what happened after Mark died, my grief journey, and how I found a way to thrive and to find love again. So, for anyone who's looking to find love again, I had some pretty amazing ways that I met my partner, Robert, who I'm with
Right.
right now. And so I talk about that as well in the book. And so it's just meant to really encourage anyone who's going through challenging times and especially loss to find ways for themselves. It's not prescriptive. It's just my story. And the hope is that it inspires anyone who reads it to find their own path to thriving again.
Beautiful, beautiful. The main reason that I do the podcast is for people to share their stories so that it can support and help others in whatever way possible. I am a published author, and I it's not the easiest thing for me to do writing. And I do believe listening and allowing those to share stories is more my jam. Like I feel that that's my calling. It's not necessarily writing. Someday there's another book out there for me, maybe a series I've talked about a little bit. But anyway, I love that you took the time. Um, Sounds like it was very quickly that you were able to do it. It was probably beautiful that you had been journaling all that time and writing all of those posts. That makes gives you that foundation for books. I'm glad that you decided to do the book. Can't wait to purchase it myself. And like I said, for those that may be struggling during the holiday season, I would definitely recommend getting your hands on Jenny's book. So, Jenny, thank you so much for
Well,
sharing.
thank you, Teresa, for having
Yeah,
me on the podcast. And yeah, I think with holidays coming, right, it's a good
yeah,
time to really think about how to get through that time and to find moments of joy where you
yeah,
can,
yeah, yeah.
right?
So, as listeners, I know Jenny has encouraged me, and I hope that she has inspired and encouraged you to maybe pick up that book and allow that book to help you through a difficult time. So, Jenny, just again, just so grateful for your time and just reminding us that hope and love and healing is always within our reach. And so for those that are listening, don't forget, as always, to do all the things like, comment, share, follow. We would love for you to especially share this episode with someone else that you know that it will inspire and help. So thank you so much, Jenny.
Teresa, could I
Yeah.
ask? I just want to add a couple resources that might be helpful to
Yeah,
listeners
yeah.
more than the
My
book. I'd
goodness.
forgotten.
Yeah.
So my website, foreverflyfree.com,
Hmm.
there are a
Hmm.
couple playlists. So I think I mentioned how healing I felt music
Yeah,
was.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so there's a Phoenix playlist that were some of the songs that we played for Mark. And if you read the book, there are songs with words that have very specific meaning that are in the playlist. And then there's the Healing Journey playlist on my website that was music that really comforted me and was my constant companion when I was in grief that first year. And I would just love for listeners to check those out because maybe, especially the healing journey, could be of
Yeah.
comfort. And I also write a lot of articles on Substack on topics like trusting your intuition, courage, physical healing from trauma. So those might be
Yeah.
resources that listeners might really get some benefit from reading as
Perfect.
well.
Yes, thank you for stopping me and adding that to this
Yeah.
episode. That's great information. I'll make sure that I grab all that and put that in the show notes so all of those are there. That it sounds like going to your website, people can find all of that there,
Yeah.
correct?
Mhm.
Perfect.
That's right.
Okay. Well, thanks again so much for sharing from your heart your story. Difficult story to share, but so thankful that you did.